Okay, well, good morning. I'm Bruce Agnew. I'm the director of the Regional Infrastructure Accelerator here at Pinware. We are funded by the U.S. Department of Transportation, Build America Bureau, and we're going to talk a lot about that over the course of the next 2.5 days. But I also was, for many years, along with former Pinware President Chuck Winder, who will be part of our panel coming up, the co-chair of the Binational Transportation Working Group for Pinware. And that work has evolved into this economic corridor initiative that we are going to be listening to and hearing about today. And
if you're doing anything right, you're going to be doing business back and forth with those folks. So some of the trade barriers and issues we have in this description for this panel, actually, I'm going to read it right off my phone now that I put my glasses on. The Pacific Northwest trades depends on seamless movement of goods across the U.S.-Canada border. This session will highlight the opportunities for and examples of regional collaboration that strengthens multifunctional freight corridors, trade corridors, etc. That includes, but not limited to, railroad, ports, pipelines, planes, trains, automobiles, and everything else that we want to move, plus the products in them. And here's where we get cross-threaded. Stop fighting over the commodity type. Get this out of the hands of the politicians so you stop looking at the next poll that's going to come up and what you think your electorate wants. I'm going to ask you guys to park that and think about what we actually need for the region going forward for the next 30, 40, 50 years. So we need to connect our supports economic development and divides robust trades. Leaders up here will share strategies and best practice, improve efficiency, resilience, competitiveness in our shared supply lines. Now, as a little of an aside, when I'm going to Bellevue, when I came up there, I took my own aircraft. And I want to tell you, I'll tell you what, the most civilized way to get across the border, if you ever are tired of all the regulations we have put in place, is to take your own aircraft. It harkens back to the day when all you had to use was a driver's license and you didn't need passports and everything else. It's almost that simple. You're pre-registered, you go into an electronic system, I file where I'm going to land, I call up the Borders and Custom agent and I say, hey, Shane Getson, here's my pilot's number. I'm looking for permission to land. They pull up off their system, they look at it, and as long as you do it an hour before you're crossing, and they'll either say yay or nay. You estimate within a half-hour timeline when you're going to be there. You land, go over to customs, they come out, they sniff to see if you're carrying a nuclear device of some sort. It's still antiquated back from the day, that's okay. And you're in and out of that office, all of them about 10 minutes, including them saying, here's some snacks, here's to the restaurant, whatever else we can need, welcome to the US. Coming back, if you're registered with CanPass, which is another system that we have up on our end, you can go to a number of designated airports of entry. Same thing when I'm leaving the US, I register online, let it you know I'm leaving. I call up the Canadian guys, I have about a 10-minute conversation saying if there's anything changed in my manifest. When I land at my own home airport, it's simply a phone call. This is something that we should be thinking of when it comes to trade and commerce, pre-approved, knowing who you're working with, where your partners are, and those trade jurisdictions. If we can start getting back to covering off and pre-approving a lot of our loads, our freight, and all those type of things, this thing lights up like a Christmas tree. Looking at continuing the trade, looking at enhancements, whether it's foreign trade zones, free trade zones, building out the connectivity for the future for the next number of years, not the next electoral cycle, the next number of years. Think of planting that tree and having your grandkids swing on it, and you might not even be there to do it. This is the challenge and the task when it comes to major infrastructure projects, these infrastructures, these corridors that we're talking about, harmonizing your rules, your regulations, and all of those things that are required to get to a yes. If we're going to be globally competitive and, quite frankly, quit fighting in the sandbox like a bunch of kids, we'd better figure this stuff out in a hurry, and I'm going to challenge you and our panel contestants to walk us through that. So with that, please come up on stage. One's Peter and the other one's not. I'll let you figure out which one that is. Since we're out in the left coast here a bit, you guys can figure out which ones are who. And what I'll do there, and then we also have Chuck Whitaker on, sorry, now I'm going back to my phone to make sure I got all the names. So I got Peter Scholz. He would be the one to my immediate left for those following along at home. And I've got Councilor Trudy Klassen as well from Prince George. The beautiful, I'm gonna annex northern BC, by the way. Oh, I'm telling him to turn the mic up. There we go. Is that better? I'm gonna annex northern BC. I already warned my BC colleagues out there that we're going to look at corridors. I'm going to go out and do a bunch of conversations, and we're going to just build a whole alliance around trade corridors. And we'll park the politics, but you're going to become part of our coast group to go out there. And then also we have Chuck Winder. He's a former Idaho senator, state senator. Should need no introduction. Was also our president as well. Chuck, are you online there with us? Oh, good, you are. Hello, sir. You look taller than you usually are. The man is about 6'4" from what I recall. He comes in with a swagger and a cowboy hat most days. But Chuck, you've actually been, all joking aside, just a huge mentor to a number of us coming into the organization, been carrying the torch for years, and a no nonsense kind of guy out of that Idaho country. So with that, please give our panelists a big round of applause. No, yeah, oh yeah, please sit. Yeah, I'm sorry. Whatever makes you comfortable, sit, stand. It's going to be really casual. Anything that I do is never too formal. It's supposed to be, but we want some interaction and some fun here. So Peter, you were up in the spot first. And when I met Peter, he was working on this project called the Alberta to Alaska Railroad. So he was the guy that was kind of behind the scenes doing a ton of the paperwork, desktop studies to see what this thing could actually do. Finances were there, it looked pretty good. The economics were looking good. We had a lot of political support. And then a bunch of stuff took place down east that happens down east sometimes. And the project kind of got tied up with all that financial world and some of the tomfoolery that takes place in the stock exchange and all that stuff. But this guy still had the vision. A number of folks up there still did, including the former lieutenant governor from Alaska, who I recently met on another trip as well. This is still alive. If you've heard Representative McNabe from Alaska country, he's still pushing this in a big way. And Pete is going to talk to us about actual corridors up to the north. So with that, Pete, microphone's yours. Round of applause for this guy.
Thank you, Shane, for that lovely introduction. And I want to thank, and funny as well, I don't, Shane is like my wannabe for charisma and a sense of humor, but I can't fake it. And I also want to thank Bruce for inviting me to come up. And not here is Donald McInnes, a Vancouver-based businessman who wants to help get the Alaska Railroad built, and he helped with the resources needed for me to be here today. So thank you very much to those three gentlemen. I'll see if this works. Usually I'm a cooler on these things and they end up failing. Yeah, it's not working. I didn't think it would. Oh, there we go. So a little bit about me. I spent 10 years living in Nunavut, which is in the Canadian Arctic. And then I was recruited by A2A Rail, which still was functional at that time, to move to Edmonton and take a lead role in route planning and economic development for the local communities be along the line. As there was tomfoolery, as Shane mentioned, and I ended up being laid off holding my 4-week-old daughter in my arms, with my fourth daughter at the time, and without getting severance. So, the failure of A2A affected me personally quite strongly. While at A2A, I saw two things. I saw the business assessments being done by a very well-known and extremely expensive business consulting company. The case for building a railway to Alaska was sound. It was founded on two foundations. Number one was getting Alberta bitumen out past the Prince Rupert blockade, federal blockade works. Okay, blockade. Not allowing tanker ban at the North Coast, BC. And the other one was actually lower 48 to Alaska trade using South Central ports, Anchorage, and the satellite ports around it to basically become the next Seattle. There's a lot of congestion on U.S. West Coast ports, and as you all know, we're in the Cascadia subduction zone, and there could be a major earthquake which could cause disruption to Seattle and or Portland at some point in the future. Anchorage is also a major earthquake zone, but it's a separate earthquake zone. So it had a strong business case, and it involved Indigenous folks closely. The Indigenous folks were offered 49% ownership, which is going in the right direction. But they weren't being respected in terms of routing. So that pushed me into evolve of what are all these different routes and what are all these different maps, and there's all these archival resources that we're not looking at. The A2A team wasn't willing to budge on routes, and that was causing a lot of offense with some First Nations, because some of those routes are going plowing straight through major heritage sites or grave sites, and they weren't willing to. And that was turning. Although they had a business interest, they were losing they're losing the stewardship line. So I was looking very closely, started looking very closely at the routing, and it failed suddenly. So over the next 3 years, I'll just finish. So I'm finished this site. So I'm a freelance consultant now. I'm registered with PTP in Washington and RPP in Alberta. Ironically, it's the RPP which allows me to work in the United States under the TN visa. So after A2A failed, what you're looking at is a map that became started as a mental health exercise of finishing what I was doing with the routing exercise, and then just became on a life of its own. So this map took 3 years to finish, and I'm happy to discuss the details with this after time with the team. Basically, red means that there is a railway that does exist, and orange means there's a railway that did exist, but the tracks have been removed. Green means that an engineer or surveyor at some point in the last 120 years, I spent a lot of time in the archives, and also I had the A2A notes, confirmed out the route for rail. And yellow is topographically suitable for rail, but has not been proven out, and there are major geotechnical issues en route that have not been assessed. My study zone is basically a line from Winnipeg to Prince Rupert and north, although my studies ended up moving a little bit south. Why is rail used as the benchmark? Because trains do not like to go up or down, and they do not like turning left or right. If you can put a train there, you can put a pipeline there, a highway there, a power line, whatever you want. So if you support the idea of multimodal corridors, multimodal trade corridors, you go by rail as your benchmark. And this is the map of all the potential corridors. I might be a little bit off, but I've put, well over 1,000 hours into this map, and I'm pretty sure I got most of them. It's a big tangle of lines. I categorize it this way. I see it as two main options. One is an overland Northwest Passage, which would be Canadian only. Sorry, I'll back up a little bit. So what I define as Western Canada 1.0 was a giant triangle, starting at Winnipeg, one line shooting at Prince Rupert, another line shooting at Vancouver. Western Canada is built up around that. There's a string of major cities that follow the Winnipeg to Prince Rupert line, and there's a string of major Canadian Western cities that run from Winnipeg to Vancouver on that line. That's Western Canada 1.0, and each province had its own north-south connector. And there were some attempts for another northern line, which was going North Coast BC to Hudson Bay, which was started and never finished, and is kind of like, it got up to 50% finished, but most of those lines have been deactivated, so now it's around 20% finished. That's the blue stuff. And then the purple stuff is the idea of lower 48 to Alaska, which again is not a new idea. And there's basically a BC option and an Alberta option, which I'll get into. So I'm going to talk a little bit strategic redundancy of Canada's specific supply chain. What that means is Canada 1.0 was not finished. This is a satellite image taken from a point on the Fraser River just south of Lytton. On it, the Canadian Pacific and CN Rail are sharing the Fraser Canyon. There's one on either side of the canyon. The railways have an agreement where the trains go down one side and back up the other, regardless of who owns the train. They do that because it's the only way to get enough traffic through. At this particular location, they switch sides. This is a real canyon at this stage with steep, rocky sides, frequent landslides, and there's two bridges side by side. If you give me a stick of dynamite, and I'm so inclined, and I put it right on the X where the two lines cross, you will shut down all rail traffic to the Port of Vancouver for a week. If you give me two sticks of dynamite, and I'm so inclined, and I put one on each bridge, you will shut down all rail traffic to the Port of Vancouver for a year. That's how vulnerable Canada's strategic system is. The Trans-Canada Highway, by the way, is basically, the main traffic goes on a different highway now, but if there's a significant snowstorm on Coquihalla, that's where the trucks are going. So in one 300-meter stretch, you've got Vancouver's three main arteries all together. So I'm highlighting here that there is a railway from Vancouver up to Prince George, which is slated now for demolition as of 2 weeks ago. And there is a potential connector point between the two main traffic lines, which are green to where you see the little yellow line. The little yellow square is the point that I just shown. The federal government supply chain office is really worried about this. If they built this little 60-kilometer line, you'd at least have a bypass to get into Vancouver. So if you have the major incident at this Lytton site, you can get into Vancouver. Or if you have a major earthquake at Vancouver, Seattle, then some of the traffic can be moved up to Prince Rupert. You also need to improve the case at Prince Rupert, and I'm probably going over time. Now, moving onwards, comparing what I call Western Canada 2.0, the Overland Northwest Passage versus Athabasca corridors. I'll try to blast through this quickly. As I said, I'm happy to meet afterwards. I've mentioned it already. It has mixed FN support, First Nation support, generally very strong in Saskatchewan, very moderate to downish on the coast. It has potential for Asia, Europe throughput, resource exports from Canada to Europe and Asia. Access for the first time to central northern Saskatchewan resources, which include a tremendous amount of rare earths. Major challenges including the Hudson Bay ice regime, which is extremely complicated, a lot of permafrost, port capacity at both ends, et cetera, and the cost ranges from, I won't go into that. The Athabasca corridors or Alaska, connecting Alaska, lower 48 to Alaska, which I'll spend a bit more time on. It's currently just a 2-lane highway and an LNG pipeline right away. That's it. There's generally good First Nation support along the entire line. Strong aspect towards it. Our A2A assets indicated that the Anchorage area would become the 6th major U.S. West Coast port with 50 to 200 million tons a year traffic. That alone is enough to warrant the cost of construction of that railway without exports of bitumen. It would be the spine to Fortress North America, because if there is a serious international event and the U.S. Pacific Navy is involved in doing things, then the ferry services between Seattle and Anchorage and Alaska may have some issues. And the 2-lane highway is 120 kilometers from the coast at one point, and it's 2 lanes wide. One missile, it's gone. So this railway would be the spine of Fortress North America. For tourism and passenger services, we did not look at that at A2A Rail. But just think about a passenger service. You can get on a train in Miami and go to Anchorage and arrive in Anchorage 2 weeks later. You can mark it as a rite of passage for every American to see their country. I think a lot of Americans would be interested in doing that. And there's a lot of shorter versions of that that can work down near the border. It would also give you access to the Yukon and resources in the Mackenzie Mountains. Okay, going to wrap up. It is expensive to build. I'm going to skip over this slide so I can stay on time. I've already mentioned the Indigenous right-of-way stuff, and I guess I'll leave it there. Map, so I stay on time. Okay.
Applause, folks. Thank you.
So in the long and the short of that is all the cool kids are playing in the north. So when Pete is laying that out for you guys and showing you all these different routes, it's not like we have to reinvent the wheel. Basically, some we have to stumble across that we're already taking out of service. Look at what we can do to bolster those back up. Look at trying to build out that short line rail again. You don't have to have the big guys just doing it all the time. And that helps for generating revenue back in your areas. And when you have that connectivity to the world stage, literally all the cool kids in the world are going up in the north. That's why the Russians and the Chinese are going up there. That's why everyone's interested in Greenland and points beyond. It's because literally that whole country is opening up out there. And if we in our area don't take advantage of what's in our backyards, then that's bad on us. So thanks again for that, Pete. We have, I'm going to do this in order here. Let's do that. I was going to put Chuck ahead of you, but actually we've got Councilor Klassen up here. So if you would like to, yeah, thank you.
How much do you need? How much do you need?
I think it's 15 minutes, but I don't.
She's got 15 minutes, right? That's a big yes.
Okay, all right. Okay, thank you. Thank you. I'm extremely honored to be here. And where do I start? I'm here. Joining Alberta? Absolutely. I'm signing up for that. I'm actually a born and bred Albertan, so you wouldn't have to convince me for long. But I think we can move people along. I'm Trudy Klassen. I'm first term city council. And so what am I doing here? I ran for city council because over the 30 years that my husband and I have lived in Prince George, which is the center, or 8 hours from everywhere, but in the center of everything. And I think Pete did a great job of touching on that a little bit, and I'll explain that a little bit more. But over the 30 years that we lived in Prince George, we had to change our complete set of friends twice. And it was because they moved away because of lack of opportunity, and they wanted something for their kids. And I know that I'm not speaking about something that those of you who live in either the American or the Canadian hinterlands, you know this, because this is our reality. We seem to have so much potential, but it's not counting right where we are. And so that's why I ran for council. And that's why I'm here, because our mayor came last year to Whistler, and he said, this is where we need to be. And he is in Hong Kong, actually, at his son's basketball playing retirement party. Yeah. Anyway, thank you, Emily Getson and Peter Scholz and Chuck Winder. Thank you for being part of this panel. My speech will be a little bit rambly, and I'll tell you why. Because I had full plans yesterday on my way here, because I had an 8-hour trip planned out coming by air. And I had planned that during my hour waits in the airports that I would be sitting and finalizing my speech. Well, I arrive at the airport and the flight is an hour and a half late. And so I ended up driving all night. And I just got here this morning. Now imagine if I had been able to sit in a passenger train, on a lovely bench, with my feet up on the bench across from me and having my laptop in my lap. I could have had a beautifully written speech all ready for you. So now it's going to be a bit disjointed. And so just bear with me. My first Penware experience was in July. And the thing that stood out to me the most, besides all the discussion about the incredible need for more and more energy over the next 10 years, but Washington Senator Lisa Wellman said at the meeting, she said, we have to think about the fact that when we're talking about upgrading our infrastructure, that we are 3 to 5 generations behind much of Asia. And so that's where we're at. Like, what do we do with that fact? Like, that's crazy. And I think part of what we have to do is we have to have the funds to do this. And we may not, I mean, and who knows how well, some of Asia's systems will work and continue to work. But at the very least, we have to improve significantly what we're doing. And I just really appreciate the discussion already what the panelists have said. But Prince George, I think, is the key. And it's the key to our to the problems of overcrowding in other ports and other rail connecting corridors. It's the key to the capacity issues and energy, of course, the energy corridor and critical mineral, the need for critical minerals. And the reason Prince George is key is because of where it's situated. So I see my handy chart is up there, which I'm going to try to click. Let's see. This is from the Port of Prince Rupert. Port of Prince Rupert is 17 rail hours from Prince George, and it's an 8-hour drive. Let's see. Yes. Okay. Where I wanted to get to. Take a look at this map. This is from Prince Rupert to Asia. It's the shortest transit time in comparison with the ports in the Pacific Northwest. And I know that up in Stewart, they're also looking at, which is further north of Prince Rupert, it's a nice free port as well, and they're looking at expanding there, so that will be even better. And then the next one, it's the deepest natural harbor in North America. And it's the safest approach because the time it takes to be piloted in is less than Vancouver or Seattle. And this, Peter was talking about the route profile, and you take a look from Prince Rupert to Chicago. It's the flattest of all of the ones there. And that doesn't mean that we want to take away your business. It's just, we're a good option. And, and here's CN's route. And the reason it's a CN map is because that's the only rail that goes to, or railway service that goes to Prince Rupert. And you can see Prince George sort of very close, like from the Prince Rupert dot. And that's where we are. Prince George is halfway between the American mainland and Alaska. And so I think that puts us in a really good spot. I won't talk too much. I had notes here because it'll take less time. I have time? Okay. All right. Okay. Because what I did, so when we were crossing the border yesterday around like 1 o'clock at night or 2 o'clock, whatever it was, the border guard asked me where I was going, and I said, I'm going to Penware in Portland. And he was grilling me a little bit and trying to find out if I did this for work, like if I was getting paid. And I said, well, and then he said, are you a subject matter expert? And I had to chuckle because no, I'm no subject matter expert, but I know a few. And so when I found out that I was speaking here, I thought I would ask the one that I had know the best in my own city. And here is what she said. Her name is Chris Monroe, and she has her own consulting company. The population of BC is approximately 5.7 million people. Of these, the vast majority live approximately 150 miles from the American border, which really means we all just want to be Americans. And nobody laughs. Oh, come on. But there is, of course, as everywhere, there is a very large urban-rural divide in BC. And most of the incredible natural resources for export are found in the hinterland, outside of the Lower Mainland. In BC, we say beyond Hope. Hope is a city that's sort of south. So yes, that's how we always feel. Yeah. But this presents many transportation problems. BC is served by 3 rail lines: Canadian National, the recently merged CPR and KCS. And those 2 main objectives of those railways is to transport cargo to the ports of Prince Rupert, Vancouver, and West Shore terminals in Delta. The 3rd rail line is Burlington Northern Santa Fe, and it's the only U.S. railway in BC transporting cargo from northwestern U.S. to Vancouver. And Chris goes on to say that the Canadian railways suffer from overcapacity currently and are reinvesting in infrastructure along the main east-west corridors in BC, but not north-south. So that's where we need to have some work to do. While rail transportation is considered more efficient and environmentally friendly, most freight from the US and Mexico travels by truck. And you can drive down the highways in northern BC and you'll have ruts that are like this deep on the pavement. Now, it's not everywhere, but often there are spots like that. And considerations for why people choose to use trucking is because of the flexible scheduling and many more corridors from north to south to cross the border. BC is underutilized for rail corridors, and as this is a growing market, we need to lobby for future growth in this area. Infrastructure funding, federal in Canada only, for rail is challenging as it is extremely expensive to pursue new rail lines, especially through dense urban areas. The north of BC is not dense urban, and Prince George is about it. And we have only like 85,000 people. However, there may be some opportunities for expansion through the Canadian government's recent commitment and focus on building infrastructure, which is incredibly dire. We're in dire need of that to happen. BC's highway transportation also suffers from a lack of capacity. Many of the existing corridors, and Peter already talked about some of this, from north to south offer only single lanes each way. The variability of the landscape is challenging and expensive for new roadways to be constructed. The effect of thousands of heavy hauling trucks on these roadways is particularly damaging, and maintenance costs are high. Many of these corridors travel right through the middle of small rural communities, causing complaints of high traffic, noise, and pollution. There are a significant number of accidents on these roadways, which delay freight and, of course, cost lives. As demand grows for trucking, due to the lack of other reasonable options like rail, the toll on BC highways will only grow. And of course, there's only the one passenger railway really that crosses the American border, and that's the Amtrak Cascadia line. We only have Canada's Via Rail. It doesn't even, it travels east, and it's hard to get on. We used to. I know we've taken our kids twice and then that stopped. But again, that for a livability factor, it makes the north significantly less friendly. And Chris concludes, BC transport transportation network is under capacity for its current requirements and has not been developed per the US railways. The lack of taxpayer funding has put us behind the 8 ball for growing the economy. And remember, I said that I had ran for council because I was concerned for our economy and growth in our economy. And then I'll go into, I asked a new Canadian, well, he's not even a Canadian yet. He's a young man, Saransh Tiku. He's from, I mean, he was born in India, but he has a degree from the London School of Economics. He's a bright young man, and he's the territorial manager for Northern BC and Yukon for Linde, which produces, like, it's the gases and the oxygen tanks and stuff. And he loves to be an out-of-the-box thinker, and I think that it's people like that that are going to be the future. And so he came up with this idea. And he has actually had to resolve some of the issues with trying to get some of his product up into, especially the north of Northwest Territories. This is what he wrote. When we talk about improving trade across the Pacific Northwest, we often think about big infrastructure, of course, which we do need: new tracks, new terminals, and new pipelines. But innovation doesn't always have to mean concrete and steel. So he's suggesting something that we can do in the interim while we're waiting. And it's specifically geared to what he's talking about is helping those communities that are along the rail lines to actually take part in the wealth that can be created by the rail. So sometimes it means looking at what we already have and using it more intelligently. The truth is, rails already run through our communities, towns like Prince George, Red Deer in Alberta, and even smaller communities like Smithers or Osoyoos, which is right next to the American border. But for most of our small and medium-sized businesses, the railway might go through, but for all that, they may as well be invisible because they do not serve those small communities. They use the space, but they just leave behind echoes of the whistle and steel dust. If you're a large manufacturer in Edmonton or Vancouver, rail access is routine. But if you're a small forestry supplier in Prince George or a food producer in Osoyoos, and I imagine this would be the same in any smaller towns anywhere, you can't lease a full rail car. You can't negotiate national freight contracts. So you end up trucking everything, paying far more per ton, creating congestion, and of course, producing higher emissions. So what if we change that equation? What if, while waiting for new railways, cities themselves or any other organization became logistics enablers? Imagine a model where two cities, let's say, Prince George and Portland, agree to co-lease a single rail car. The car runs once a week between the two cities. Local businesses can book space on it, and the same way that you'd book space in a co-working office or on a less than truckload freight network. No new rail lines, no massive capital projects, just smarter collaboration. Everyone shares the cost of the lease, and small companies finally get access to rail at a nominal cost, opening new markets that were once out of reach. It's about democratizing trade. Right now, our economic corridors are efficient, but they're exclusive. The next phase of regional growth should focus on inclusion, letting smaller enterprises plug into continental logistics. When we connect cities through shared freight solutions, we don't just move goods, we move and enable opportunity. We make the Pacific Northwest economy more resilient, more attractive, more competitive, and more equitable. Across the region, we have no shortage of ideas, writes Saransh. What we need is the courage to think differently. If we can share offices, if we can share broadband and share data, we can surely share freight space. Let's start building not just rail lines, but relationships from city to city, corridor to corridor. That's how we make trade truly frictionless. And who knows, maybe the first sister city rail car between Prince George and Portland might just start a whole new movement in the Pacific Northwest. And we just might teach the world a thing or two. How am I doing for time? That's time? Okay. I think that's, yeah, some good ideas there. And I think the key is that we keep talking and we keep thinking and we recognize the urgency. I think that's part of what we need to do. Thank you.
You know, I love that theme. You know, thinking out of the box a little bit, looking at how we have the assets at our disposal. And then the other one too is any of you flat earthers out there? Anyone want to admit it? Okay, we got one. Good. I'll explain this to you later. But everyone else who thinks the globe actually works, when we start looking at shipping distances, we got to remember that in that Great Circle. So that northern country is actually the closest points from two areas that we want to go. So if we want to get your stuff to the market, depending on who you're going to overseas, whether it's India, whether it's Asia, whether it's Europe, those are some of the connections we can start looking at. And then when you look at how sporty it gets, and thank God for President Trump, the administration getting the Middle East settled down. But up until then, for the last couple of years, we've had a ton of issues with our cartage and goods having to go around the Great Horn of Africa because of how sporty it was getting out there. And then you've got the Panama Canal issues that are taking place with drying up from water. And then your Panamax are only so skinny because they got to make it through that old canal that was done 100 and some odd years ago. So all the cool kids are in the north again. So you know, get your stuff to market and do that. There's where you've got your logistics deserts essentially. And when you start looking at what else you can build, it really strengthens the whole area. So with that, Senator Winder, you'll always be senator to me regardless of electoral cycles. And you're also my first president when I came in on Penn-War and got to meet you for the first time. Please give it up for Senator Winder, and he's going to walk us through his experience of cross-border economic corridors. Thank you, sir.
Well, thank you very much, Shane, for the kind words earlier and for the introduction just now. It's my pleasure to kind of try and tie all this together. And I would begin by just giving you a little bit of background about myself. Served on a countywide highway district for 13 years. Served for 11 years as chairman of the Idaho State Transportation Board and 16 years as a member of the Senate Transportation Committee. As Bruce mentioned earlier, I served as co-chair on the Penn-War Transportation and Infrastructure Committee. I was elected a vice president of Penn-War and later as president. And so what I'm trying to do is consolidate what I've learned through those experiences and what I'm going to share today based on my 12 years of participation with Penn-War and all the people from Canada and the US that I've had the pleasure of working with. And that those that are of us that are committed to the mission of cooperative economies, cooperative movement of people back and forth across our borders. And I think this is one of the greatest things that we can do. As president of Penn-War, you get to establish kind of your presidential theme. I chose for my theme based again on what I'd learned in my 12 years of working with the Canadians and with the states in the US, that food security and supply and sustainability was one of the key issues. Energy supply, security and sustainability was a key issue. Critical minerals supply, security and sustainability were probably the three most important things to our economies, to our well-being, and to our future, which brings me back to why I'm on this panel today, and that I really believe these three things are the basis for our national security. If we can't feed ourselves, if we don't have energy, if we don't have critical minerals, essential minerals to do with the things that we need to do and to keep our economy prosperous, I believe we'll fail as an economy and we'll fail as a culture. During COVID, as an example, I was told by a friend of mine who was a close advisor to President Trump that the US was literally within days and perhaps hours of having to declare a national emergency because of supply chain problems that were going on and the impact they were having on all of our economies, both Canadian and the US. I believe that, and I support a Canadian-American effort to develop a bilateral supply chain agreement to assure that we can feed our people, provide the energy that we need, and provide the necessary critical and rare minerals necessary for our electronics industry and for our military complex to succeed. In order to do this, we need a state of art that throughout transportation system, local, it begins at our local, bridges locally, transit, trucking, ships, barges, and trains, I think about Lewiston, Idaho is a good example. If they took the barging off the Columbia and Lower Snake River, it's going to generate the requirements for somewhere around 150,000 to 200,000 semi trucks to carry that same load that the barges are carrying. As I understand, the train system is pretty much at capacity, so they're not able to take that on. But let's now look at the things we've heard about the trains and the connections. I grew up in a railroad family. My grandfather worked for Union Pacific. My father worked for Union Pacific. So I heard and kind of lived, particularly freight transportation. And once in a while, we'd go on a family trip and ride the passenger rail, which no longer exists through our part of Utah, Idaho, and Oregon. And so we're working on those things. One of the Amtrak commissioners, I believe, is there for the winter meeting in Portland. Elaine Clegg, who's from Boise, has been an advocate for expansion of what we called the Pioneer Line, which used to run from, I believe, Omaha, Nebraska, all the way through Salt Lake and into Boise and into Portland. We're trying to get those back. As I mentioned earlier, I believe these things are important to our economy, but also for our national security as we look at moving people and goods throughout our economy. So let's kind of wrap up my thoughts as we look at what previous President Mike Cuff said. If there's anything I've learned about Pinwar is if we can work together, we can solve about any problem that comes up between our region. And I think Pinwar is still the only really regional bilateral group along the northern border. And so I look forward to continuing that relationship. I know we've had some rocky roads here the first 6 to 7 months of the new presidency, but I think we'll get through those. We've seen an effort to negotiate and work through issues. And I think that we need a strong economy, a strong ally on our northern border as we look at all the challenges that are coming out of particularly the Arctic area, but also looking at the resources that are available throughout the Arctic area in both the United States and Canada through the territories that are there. We have tremendous opportunity, and I really believe we'd be truly foolish and without any measure of competency if we don't figure out some ways to improve the relationship going forward, maintain those corridors for ease of people movement, but also for those natural resources. And I think we can make both of our economies stronger and provide that balance of trade that we really need back and forth. And I look forward to that. Shane, I know that you're coming on, all the different leaders that are in the chain of development for Pinwar have that same vision of how do we improve our economies, how do we look after our national security, and how do we deal with the three most critical things that make our economies move. And that's food, that's energy, and it's critical and rare minerals. And with that, I'll close my comments.
Well, and with that, Senator, again, big round of applause. Absolutely spot on.
Thank you very much. Sorry I can't be there. I'm actually at a reunion of officers candidates down in Florida. I'm there for another day or so, but I wish I could have been there with you, and thank everybody for your participation and making the effort to be there. Sorry I couldn't have joined you personally.
No problem at all, Chuck. And if you listen to the news reports, all of you guys are outliers. We all fight amongst each other. There is massive riots in the street, and there could be Blackhawks landing at any moment. So we'll keep you posted, Chuck, if we need an evac. But so far, so good for the Alberta crew here and the rest of us who braved the hard, mean streets of Portland to come here. So it's only tongue in cheek. And where I'm going to lead in with that, guys, is if we don't sit out there and we don't correct the record and we don't tell our stories and we don't keep these connections open, that other side wins for whatever reason. And don't pick a team, whether it's red or blue or orange or anything else. It's literally the other ones that don't want us to work together. And as elected and as industry leaders and folks in these organizations, that's what our challenge is to make sure we keep these conversations going, have some of those conversations. And I love the point you made where, I'm not the expert, but I know somebody who is. And that's what the power of this organization does, you folks. So really appreciate that. A couple things that struck me there. Prince George, great place to be for how many months of the year, right? It's cold, it's bad, all these things, blah, blah, blah. And it's isolated and it's not connected to anything, but yeah. So how does that work? You want to set the record? Like, where do you go? Where do you travel? What kind of businesses are going back and forth in the region?
Kind of businesses like
Yeah, so if we're looking to Chuck's point here, we got food, fiber, security, we need energy security. What's Prince George doing? What do you guys have to offer?
a little bit of everything, actually. Because of the amount of mining, especially that's going on in our region, and will be coming online with the Golden Triangle. I don't know how many of you know about the Golden Triangle.
Tell us about it.
Oh, you could probably do a better job of this. You can. Okay, well,
Chuck, you got me going here now. We're going to talk about actual practical things.
he can fill in the blanks and provide the details. It's an area in northwestern BC that is, my husband, who's an investor, a small time investor, he thinks, Trudy, honestly, it's trillions of dollars worth of critical minerals up there. And that is all, I mean, eventually it's going to be mined. And I often say it's going to be mined by someone, may as well be us. Build our hospitals, build our schools.
Well, and that's a good point too. So along these corridors, when we're talking about trade and we're securing our futures, I would propose, and I don't know, I'm not that old. Well, I am. I'm getting pretty old now. I've got gray hair. I can't hide it. Mike laughs at me. Senator Cuff laughs at me when I say that, but I'm feeling it, Mike. I honestly am these days. So I'm starting to feel mortal. But if we don't actually take care of the assets that we have and look at our trading partners of what we have in our own backyard, somebody else is going to eat our lunch, or they don't give a blessed darn about labor rights. They don't care about the environment. They are going to rip, tear, and pull hair to get the stuff that the global market and economy wants. So I would say also that's part of our deal of making sure that when we're talking about these corridors of what we have in our own backyards, is to think what we can do in that bigger context as well. What do we supply to the world and what do we supply for our trading partners?
Yeah.
So Pete, when you started looking at some of these old connections back in the day, like you did the laptop studies and the desktop, why in the heck did we pull up railroads?
Yeah, you are.
CN adopted a system of scheduled trains they put on their Class 1 railroads. The idea, which works for your main lines. You schedule a major freight haul train, it's a mile long, 1 hour this way, 1 hour, the next hour it goes the other way, et cetera. That works for the main lines, but then they started calculating what profit they're making per kilometer. The problem is CN had purchased the Northern Alberta Railway, the BC Rail System, Northern Saskatchewan, all these spur lines. And if you're a farmer in Saskatchewan and you have a hot summer, you may have a harvest at the end of August. If you have a rainy summer, you may have a harvest at the end of September. But CN's now saying, we're not going to give you your wheat car. We're giving you wheat car on the 1st of September, whether you're ready or not, or whether it's early or not. It doesn't work that way. And you can't apply those same kind of calculations to your spur lines. And CN proceeded to do that. And they were finding, oh, we're not making enough money. So CN would go, okay, this spur line's not making enough money. We'll put our train car out there. You're not available. Okay, you're not using it yet. It's not making enough money. So they wouldn't provide such bad service. Shouldn't use bad words like crappy. This is a common complaint I've heard across 3 provinces. What do? People switch to trucks. They need to get the product out. The grains are only so full. So then CN goes, well, we're not making enough money. So they apply to shut down the line. And they have shut down 1/3 of the Saskatchewan system. And they pull out the tracks, and that steel is then pads their quarterly statement. I have a map, of course.
I would imagine you would, yeah.
I did, of all the rail lines that have been shut down across the prairies. It is depressing. It is in thousands of miles. And this is in spite of a lot of smaller short lines that have come online to serve individual markets. The other Class 1 railways have adopted a similar approach. CP has done some shutdowns as well. I think I've answered your question because I can keep
No
going.
worries. And so leading in there a little bit too, and Saskatchewan, when I started looking at this back, 5-6 years ago, trying to figure those anchor tenants. And what I did was I looked into the Midwest, because you guys got it right. You kept your little short line railroads. You had both the north and south, the big ones, and you had those collectors. In Canada, to Peter's point, we started pulling them up because it was Transport Canada. Basically, it said at the time, we don't want your secondary track. We're going to charge you a full choke as if it's your primary track. So they started taking out the secondary tracks. And then you had these deserts taking place when we started moving products. And then to your point, Councilor, you had industries kind of getting caught between a rock and a hard place. Now, Saskatchewan, they did better than us. In Alberta, we allowed them to pull up the actual track, and we actually allowed them to pull out the ties. Saskatchewan, for the most part, protected those and said, okay, if you want to abandon your tracks, you leave those in place. So Saskatchewan has more small rail companies than they do for mileage than they do for the majors. And we also saw a third party come into place. And this is to give an idea for what you guys have already done in the States. And this is kind of what's happening up there. The third largest railroad company we have is a company called Can Do. And they're comprised of folks that used to work for CN and CP that do that first mile, last mile customer service. So they'll shuttle the cars around, build the track, do those things. And here's a massive opportunity. Little old Oyen, Alberta, Doug Jones, shout out to Doug if you're out there, saw this as a town mayor, started a little railroad company and said, okay, why don't we start buying up some of these abandoned tracks? Why don't we start buying up these lines? Lo and behold, they become the logistics experts for throwing up windmills. Now they're looking at building another couple of 100 kilometers of track. But we have to make sure that we allow that local grassroots thing to feed and supply into the big system. So as this group here, I would strongly encourage, when you're talking about corridors, it's whatever someone's comfortable with. And clickety clack, the train has gone down the track for so long, everyone's comfortable with that. I say the P word, pipeline, and all of a sudden some hackles come up. But I might move the same commodity in a train and no one blinks an eye, which drives me bonkers, but that's how the world works. But if we look at these corridors and we start coveting these connections between our regions, I think that's really where Penmore has an opportunity to put that out. Chuck, what are some of the things down in your area that you had to work on to kind of take that stance that you didn't lose the existing infrastructure you had, and then trying to get people future-proofed so they don't treat everything like a snow globe and don't allow for development going forward?
Yeah, it's kind of the same thing that you talked about in Canada. The mainline railroads did do away with a lot of the shorter lines that were primarily feeding agricultural and natural resource industries. Fortunately, we've had some significant short lines come in, like Whitco and others that have really gone in around the U.S., found those critical short line roads, and have been able to acquire the rights to use them, and then have negotiated agreements to connect into the mainline railroads for shipment of products. So it's made a huge difference. And I think, to me, that may be kind of the future of some of these smaller rural areas that you're talking about. Some of the smaller, perhaps more remote mining areas, is to look for those short line operators and try and make agreements with them to operate. And I think, to me at least, that seems to be the most immediate use of any rail and demand for service, which is still huge. It just doesn't meet the scale that the mainline railroads want.
I appreciate that. Now, do we have any questions from the audience here? We're in the Q&A part. I'm just trying to poke the conversation a bit. Bruce, do we have anything there? If not, we're just going to keep talking. Here you go, sir.
I'm back
Yeah,
here.
gentleman in the back.
Thank you. Hi, I'm Mike Butler from Coastal Gateway Ports. We have 3 private ports on the West Coast. And so my question about the trade corridors that you guys are setting up, have you considered anything along the shipping routes and the ship management side, as far as repairing ships and managing all the increased traffic that's going to be coming up? I know Canada has an issue with dealing with the ships and their maintenance out of China, for example, and other places that don't really take care of their ships very well. So that's a question I wanted to see if you had.
Well, maybe I'll take a crack at it first. I'm the moderator, but I'm going to talk about ships a little bit. And one of the pitches that I use, and I'll say this to all the folks on stage, when I'm talking about economic corridors, I'm going to put in the real Canadian accent there. And when I'm talking about the Canadian corridors, I'm always saying one boot, one dusty cowboy boot is in Alberta and the other one's touching salt water, and it doesn't necessarily have to be on my own shoreline. So that comes back to the whole shipping context. And one of the things I would love to see when we're up in Edmonton there and we're talking at the AGM, and maybe we can salt your appetite here a little bit. Who are your trading partners once you get it off your shore? What is your reputational risk? Premier sent me over to Reykjavik last year to go with this Arctic Circle conference. I ended up meeting the shipbuilders. We saw Senator Murkowski up there, received a nice award out of Alaska, talking about icebreakers. And then it got a little sporty out there with the United Nations, or not the United Nations, with NATO, giving China a couple of these finger wags in a 2,500 person room, demanding an apology. The apology was because of the coastal operations that were taking place or would have been taking place between Russia and China off our own coastlines, basically. And you had a number of exercises that were taking place out in Alaska. So everybody was paying attention to it. I ended up meeting the gentleman from Davies. So we've got Finland, Canada, and the US put together the Ice Pact, and we're way behind the 8 ball of getting stuff done. So when I talk to, a lot of this is regulations and goofy things. And the other thing is we haven't built ships forever, both in Canada and the US. And all of a sudden you're taking an industry that hasn't had a lot of opportunity to do it, and you're trying to go from 0 to 100 miles an hour, and that just doesn't work very well anywhere. But what I looked at this was that technical side, and here's where I want people to start thinking about your opportunities and what you have for industries in your area. To me, a ship, especially an icebreaker, is just a pressure vessel that sits on its side. We build lots of pressure vessels in Alberta, we in Saskatchewan, and in your regions and your areas. 2 biggest places that put these together basically are Texas and Alberta. And when I pitched this to the guy, I said, okay, look, we can build this if you modularize this thing out. All it is a fluid transfer system, double wall type system. We can build that. We do lots of those. Why don't we modularize this thing, use our economic corridors, our train routes, move those out to the coast. You guys pick whichever shipyard you want, spread around that love a little bit, and start stitching these things together. That's when I think we really took it by surprise. And the guy from Davies goes, actually, he says, we were thinking about talking to the guys in Texas for the same reason. So when we start looking at our region, these little ports that we have access to, we can literally start building the farm team, spread around the wealth, do those things, see what we can do within our region, think non-conventional. But just because you don't have salt water on your provincial or your state line doesn't mean your buddy down the road doesn't. So I'll throw that back maybe to Chuck, and then the other panelists have a comment there.
Yeah, I would comment on that, and just to kind of maybe relieve the gentleman that asked the question, you know, the main reason these rails run from the interiors to the exterior, they go to the coast because all the provinces, all the states, particularly in the Northwest, are dependent upon exporting products to Asia. And Idaho's 2 major trading partners are Canada and Taiwan. So we're moving lots of agricultural products. Micron Technology is the largest foreign investor in Taiwan, headquartered in Boise. So, you know, we have those ties, and we have the shipping needs that tie all this together. So whether you're looking at moving traffic from Seattle to Anchorage, or from Seattle or Vancouver, or whatever West Coast port you want to pick, where's it primarily going to go? It's going to go to Asia. It's going to go to that Pacific crest. So the railroads provide the means to get it there to the coast. In a lot of cases, it's the cheapest way to get it there. If you can't do it by barge, like we can on the Snake and Columbia rivers. So they all tie together. They all have to tie together to make this system work.
The other one too is the US. You guys were blessed with your rivers going the right direction. Ours go bass backwards in Canada. So we have to get roads and we have to get rail to make it work, where you guys had the tonnage until we get to the shoreline. But Pete or
Question?
Again, on the shorelines of significance of tying into those smaller ports that you have sitting there, how do we connect them?
Well, it helps to reduce the congestion at the big ports, right? And one of the problems that like Vancouver and I think the other ports here on the West Coast have is the congestion there, the lack of capacity and expansion, and plus public support. And whereas Prince Rupert has been shipping, I think they just brought their second, Kitimat just brought their second, that's another port, their second line on for the liquid LNG being shipped to Japan. And so that's a big deal. That actually happened in BC. So I think that's the fact that these smaller ports can take some of the weight off the bigger ports is big. And plus, it's also where the critical minerals are. And then, of course, the energy, like in either pipelines or natural gas lines. That's what I would say.
Anything on that, Pete?
In British Columbia, you've got two categories of ports. There's fjord end ports, which are the vast majority of them, which give you they're the end of a long where a glacier used to be. There's not a lot of shoreline, and that's really only suitable for commodities. There's two ports where there's flattish land big enough for what we think of as container movement or larger port facilities. There's only two of them. That's Prince Rupert and Vancouver. Vancouver is nearing build out. It's somewhere between 150 and 200 million tons a year. The new container port at Vancouver, a Delta port, they're basically adding on this kind of awkward rectangle on top of the existing Delta port. That tells you that they're really running out of space. My main concern and / critique is that Prince Rupert was established because it's surrounded by these lands, but you need to there's a network of harbors and fjords, and you need to get to these other spaces where you can expand your port facility. They're only 500 meters wide to get to but there's no plans to build infrastructure to them. And Prince Rupert itself is nearing build out as it is without extending over to Digby Island or Tsimshian Peninsula. And there's no master plan to do that. And if you're really going to get Prince Rupert as a true backup to, say, Vancouver, Seattle, you need to build those connections. And those conversations haven't even started yet.
So does that answer your question? We went off a little bit of a tangent saying how significant it is. And the fact that you got oceanfront property, sir, I think you got a lot of friends in this crowd. So there's lots of opportunities. And what I would suggest is the convention that we, kind of done for years and stagnated. We need to reach out, let people know what you have there, what you're willing to do, and who you can partner up with. Any other questions? Okay, so as policymakers, this is the challenge to all y'all. I've been down in the States a bit, Chuck. How are you liking that? It's almost coming out natural now. I'm not forcing it anymore. Here's the deal. We have to give predictable models so industry and our trading partners can understand what the heck we're up to. One of the things is when the elephants start to dance, here's my God's honest request. Keep your elbows down. Don't start doing that rhetoric. Don't kick the elephant in the knees and don't throw peanuts. So our job is to make sure we keep these lines of communication open, keep moving forward, let that stuff settle out. We've been trading partners forever. We will be going forward forever. We just got to keep working on those networks. But as far as us, use that commonality, find out what matters to other people in their jurisdictions and regions, see what you have to offer, and then connect the dots, literally. And then if we can put the rules and regulations that are stable and predictable within those areas, Alex is going to help us out on that, on the compliance side and the regulatory. We're going to do it from our side. We got to draw these lines out of the map. And if the anchor tenant is a railroad, and as Pete put earlier, it fluctuates the least amount going up and down, I can build other stuff alongside of it. But we are not living in a snow globe. The rest of the world is going to eat our lunch. They have way more big challenges than what we do. But if we can do it right, predictable, practical solutions, not only to our needs, but going forward for generations to come. One other thing I'm going to leave you with. Who's ever heard of the Alamo? All right, everyone's heard of the Alamo. Okay, why is it significant? And then this is going to be me just going down to Texas to San Antonio with my family this summer, going to the Alamo. And what kind of have you been there? Oh, you got to go. You got to go to the Alamo. So the thing that I thought that was pretty cool, there was two movies, John Wayne, gotta love him, gotta love the Duke. That was pretty interesting how he played Crockett. And then there was Billy Bob Thornton. He played a different role on the more modern one. So that was my whole context, really, of hearing a little bit about North. When I went there, I know the senator's laughing, but I also heard there was a riot in your town, and there isn't. So give me a little latitude. So that was kind of my idea. And the Alamo was like that thing that took place. But what struck me there was 1824. That was the flag that they were showing. Remember the Constitution. They were getting pretty sporty about it. Just remember the Constitution, we'll stay under your rule. The other one was come and take them. So that harkens back to the days of the Spartans. So literally the Alamo, for a number of people, was our modern day Thermopylae. This was a stand against some other tyrannical force and the gent that thought he was going to be the Napoleon of the West. But what really struck me as I went in there wasn't one nation's flag. There was a bunch of nations' flags in there. Literally, the people that stood there knew they were against all odds. General Houston, he had to run out and try to raise an army and do all the right things. But what happened was, and this is where the connections are going to come back, they called up their buddies. They called up their buddies from other states. There was buddies from other provinces. There was German flags there. There was British flags there. There was Spanish flags there. There was a ton of people, Irish flags. There was everybody that came there to stand with their buddies because that's who you call on when you're in a fix. And that was the power of that moment. And that's why I believe Phil Collins donated $14 million worth of stuff to the Alamo Project for this museum, because that struck a chord with everybody. Think about who's in this room, just a handful of you, how much you can impact. And Senator Cuff just spoke to that. How much influence that we can have in those areas. Think of who your buddies are, where they're from, and the reason why you would call on them to do something very noble for a just cause. And that's what resonates. That's the why. So when we're talking about economic corridors, I humbly submit to you, that's our Alamo moment. If we don't fix this, no one else will. It hasn't been going well very good for very long. So let's take this concept, park some of the politics where we might fight amongst the minutia. Think about that grander vision of what the Pacific Northwest economic region can be. Let's start tying these things together and give people that story. Give them that flag to rally behind. And it's not just good for your area, it's good for all of us. And with that, I think we're out of time. Thank you very much.